Former Teacher of the Year, Philip Beadle's about to deliver a radical perspective on an age-old problem. He's speaking to a group of heads and teachers at NUT headquarters about the perennial failure of working-class white pupils in Britain's schools.
School, as a formal institution of the state, has come over time to represent and embody posh people's ways. Common children will encounter the formal, proper, posh atmosphere of the school as if it were a foreign country.
In 2005, 260,000 students failed to get 5 good GCSEs. 83%, 220,000, were white. The majority from poorer backgrounds. White working-class children, girls and boys, are more likely to fail at school than any other ethnic group. This underachievement is one of the biggest problems facing education today. But since statistics focus mainly on ethnicity, they can hide the true picture. White working-class failure is masked by white middle-class success.
White working-class boys are the lowest attaining ethnic and social group in our education system. Also, and don't read along in for empire in this, they're the majority culture. Now, this is just a statistical thing. They're the biggest ethnic and social grouping in British education. If they're the biggest ethnic and social grouping and they are also the lowest attaining, it seems fairly obvious that they're going to have a huge, great big drag on the national averages.
We do know that free school meal students at primary and secondary do significantly worse than their non-free school meal cohort children. For example, 20% less in primary school, the grades are, and then rising to 30% plus at Key Stage 4. That's part of the story. Then when you start digging further and you look at white working-class boys, you've really got some issues to address. And they could be attaining up to 45% less at GCSE in Key Stage 4. And the tale starts to begin at the end of Key Stage 1. So we're not just not making a difference, we're actually, if you look at data, making the situation worse for particularly white working class boys.
Schools were established in 1870 on a grand scale, a mass scale. And at that time, the people who were most reluctant to send their children to school were those who were from the families or the communities with least income. Because if they took their children to school, it would take them away from the jobs of the time, the factory work, the cheap labour. And there's been a tradition from that time that people from the poorest backgrounds do least well in school. So it's not a growing trend, it's a trend that's been there for 140 years.
I would argue, therefore, that raising the attainment of white working class children in our schools should be the DFES's highest priority. It isn't.
Beadle points to grants for ethnic minority achievement, which will total 178 million next year, whilst there are none specifically targeted at underachieving poor white boys.
I think that the funding that was made available through Excellence in Cities and Educational Action Zones was absolutely phenomenal, and this current government placed enormous store by trying to get a good deal for young people through those two programmes. In the Excellence in Cities programmes, they managed to secure city learning centres with amazing technology available to those sorts of children you're talking about. The government managed to bring in a programme of learning mentors for all children with specific needs. They managed to set up the Gifted and Talented programme and insisted that children from the sorts of groups that you're talking about were part of those programmes. They did an enormous amount to channel funding towards the children that are in the range that you're concerned with.
Difficulties in taking this subject on involve being explicit about race, which can be uncomfortable. You cannot have a properly functioning multicultural education system when the needs of one social and ethnic grouping are completely ignored.
But I do think, and I know from experience, that saying out loud too greatly that we're not serving the white children in the school, if you've got a large ethnic group, with some colleagues in the profession and some colleagues within government circles and local authority circles, that's a kind of, it's a taboo that you know, shouldn't really be stated.
It's appalling. It's just not good enough. I mean, you know, we are all responsible for it. Each one of us in our classrooms and wherever we are responsible, and we have to do something. But we've got to start looking, we've got to start learning, we've got to start talking about it, and not feel that it's an issue that we could be unable to speak about and have the language hijacked, feeling that it's a racist issue, because it's not. It's racist not to talk about it.
Celebrations of multiculturalism, from what I've seen, exclude whites. I've sat through whole rafts of assemblies about Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks and Jesse Owens, where the only white person mentioned all term is Adolf Hitler. And I've watched the white kids squirm with guilt, embarrassment and shame as they're force-fed a daily diet of the doctrine of their own obsolescence. How are they possibly to reverse generations of ambivalence or antipathy towards education if they only rarely see images of themselves in the school environment, and most of these are negative? Black History Month is controversial amongst the white working class. Not in that they don't recognise the black people's right to a celebration of their culture and history, but in the fact that there's no similar event through which they may investigate their own culture and how they came to be here.
At the same time, in popular culture, the working class is everywhere, successively demonised in soap operas or reality TV or whatever. And that creates a dangerous sort of mix. On the one hand, policymakers have absolved themselves for responsibility for class demarcations and those sort of issues, whilst on the other hand, they are sort of, the working class itself is served up as entertainment whilst being simultaneously demonised. And that is a real rich brew, which creates a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, it seems to me, in terms of outcomes in schools and culturally a very dangerous sort of mix in terms of people feeling literally disenfranchised and stigmatised and demonised.
The value systems of white working class kids and the school system don't match up at all. Something the white working class share with all other social and ethnic groups is pride. They have a value system and a long tradition of proud labour, and yet they're aware that they are seen as being of less worth in the eyes of what they would call posh people. If you imply someone's culture is valueless, then offer them access to another culture which you tell them is of more value, they're going to react against it. You attack someone's culture and you attack them, and this attack will cause a defensive reaction.
It's a problem of education anyway that teachers are middle class, and teaching children that are working class, they don't speak the same language, and so in a way that class is a factor.
At school and in life, middle-class people tend to behave as if they're doing working-class people a favour, educating them, teaching them how to live a proper life, and then wondering why it doesn't work.
Well, I think that they can be perceived as being awkward or difficult or disrespectful and unwilling to cooperate, when really it is a language, it is a way of going about things. I mean, you know, you say to a youngster in an inner city school, what on earth do you think you're doing? They're likely to tell you what they thought you were doing, and they'll tell it to you in no uncertain terms. You ask a sort of fairly well brought up middle class child, what on earth do you think they're doing? They'll probably say, sorry, sir. So the kind of rhetorical question is a favourite method of dealing with youngsters amongst teachers, but children from, you know, I guess the working class and some of the ethnic minority backgrounds don't understand the rhetorical question, but teachers go on asking it. Would you do that in your own home? Why are you talking about my home? Don't talk about my home. But a middle-class child from a similar background as a teacher would go, again, sorry, sir, I realise I've done something wrong. Plays the right game, says the right things, and therefore gets on better in class with the teacher and gets recognised for the things that they do well.
Robert Clack School in Dagenham believes an understanding of class is fundamental to the education of its predominantly white working class intake. It's seen a dramatic improvement. GCSE A to C's up from 16 to 78% over 10 years.
How's your coat? Do you like it? Yeah. You like that coat, don't you? Come on, get it sorted. How you doing? Get that coat off. Come on. You know that, all right? Okay. Yeah. Can you get that coat
Its
off,
Liverpudlian
please?
head teacher is fiercely proud of his roots and actively encourages his pupils to be proud of theirs.
Because I come from a working class background and from a challenging background, it's easy for me, it's natural for me to connect with people because I can talk about difficult circumstances, and it's not a script, it's not an act, it's me, it's my life. Certainly in the early days of my headship, when there was a furore about me introducing discipline into the school and a code of behaviour and everybody was screaming and ranting and raving, many of those difficult conversations were spent with me listening and then with me connecting through my own background and beliefs.
Do you think a strong middle-class head could do what he's done?
I think it'd be much more difficult because I think you have to understand the community, you have to understand the nature of class segmentation in this country and the way that a lid is put on aspiration, a lid is put on the assumptions about what you can achieve.
Shall we have a look at this lesson?
Let's say tomorrow's lesson we're going to look in great detail, okay, at the alveoli.
Mr. Smith, of course, is a Robert Clark pupil, and he was in year 9 when I became head. And it's a very, very proud time for me to see so many of these young people who were part of our re-emergence come back as teachers. He's got a first-class degree in science. He went to Imperial. He's come back. The children are connecting with him. And in his second year of teaching, he's already emerging as a great talent.
After that, we're going to look.
Many of our minority ethnic groups, not all, as time goes on and they work through the system, they begin to improve. And when we talk about social mobility, we've got more families from minority ethnic groups who will become upwardly mobile. It's not true of white working class, and that's another issue.
At Robert Clark, social mobility is alive and well. 10 former students are now back teaching.
We are examples of people who have been brought up in Dagenham, came to this school and have been successful. We're not trying to change or hide where we come from. We're proud to come from Dagenham, we're proud to work in Dagenham, and that's important to our young people because lots of them perhaps don't believe truly that they can go on to be successful. I think that's changing over time. I used to work at Sainsbury's while I was in the 6th form at this school and while I was at university studying for my economics degree. I could have continued working in Sainsbury's as a career. You've got to prove to our young people that you're working with them, you're not against them, you're not trying to catch them out, you are genuinely in it because you want those young people to be successful.
Do shelf fillers get promotion prospects? I thought
they probably have got promotion prospects. Where I used to work, in the bakery, I was like the equivalent of a shelf filler, but I had someone who supervised me. You have to work hard and a long time, true.
Just to get promoted.
So what would you say then? That there might be promotion prospects, but
very unlikely, and it takes a long time.
Well, it's not unlikely, but it takes a long time.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
When I've said I've come from Robert Clark, they're saying, why do you come back to the school? I do talk about, if it wasn't for this school with the good teachers driving me through, then I probably wouldn't be here. And I want to come back and do the same.
So don't add any more moves in unless they're developing those 4.
I think they pick up on your accent as well, because we speak quite similar to the pupils themselves. And they see that we're not trying to change. We're not ashamed of coming from Dagenham. We're not ashamed of coming back and working here. And we're not trying to change ourselves. No. Yeah. And sort of give them a push that they can see that they can achieve just as much as us if they put their mind to it.
The 1902 Education Act ruled out use of local dialects. You know, this is a huge, great big area worthy of years and years and years of study. There was a report commissioned, and this is me being London-centric, which said kids from Derbyshire, Lincolnshire or Yorkshire, they lose something when they're forced to leave their dialects at home. But, and this is a direct quote from the report, there is no London dialect of reputable antecedent and origin which is a heritage for him to surrender in school. The Cockney mode of speech with its unpleasant twang is a modern corruption with legitimate credentials and is unworthy of being the speech of any person in the capital city of the empire. There are no working class voices reading the news. Done something about the ethnicity. There are black faces, there are Asian faces, all of whom speak in crystal received pronunciation. Hugh Edwards, which everyone, the BBC points to, yeah, we got Hugh Edwards. Hugh Edwards is Welsh. Being Welsh doesn't automatically mean that you're working class. The working class parent does know that education is important, but they don't know how to involve themselves in it. They don't have the confidence to challenge appropriately when kids are under-attaining.
I met 300, 400 parents in very difficult situations where I short-term excluded their child. I had to promise, that's the key with white working class people. That's different. I had to promise that things would be better, because part of their mentality is, we've heard it all before. We've had people coming into our neck of the woods before, telling us this, telling us that, and where's it got us? Where's it got us? People taking fat pensions, time serving, pretend to others they're saying they've given loyal service, but to them they've been time servers who've actually extracted a big fat pension out of them. And they were wise to that, they told me, and they weren't going to have that from me.
I mean, he's seen as an extraordinary figure in our community. He's seen as actually a bit of a hero, actually. But he is seen as a sort of talismanic personality around. Everyone knows of Paul. He's had a bit of a tough time. He's had to confront some of the parents, and it can get a bit lively and it can get quite confrontational, but he hasn't taken a step back, and people around know and understand and respect that. I mean, he gives as good as he gets, and he understands the psychology of the community, because he understands the psychology of working class communities.
And I've made it clear to the staff early on, and the staff they've taken their responsibilities very seriously, that, you know, I fed back to them what parents were saying to me about what they felt was wrong. You know, and I said, we've got to be honest with each other here. I'm going to stick my neck out, push the boat out in terms of behaviour, which you're all asking for, but our strategy is that we can't be labelling people. We can't be saying, what can you do with these kids, which is a favourite phrase.
The culture of physical violence means that boys are not ready to assume the humility they need to learn. Many of these boys, who, let me remind you, are not allowed to display vulnerability in any form at home and have it imprinted on their DNA that prestige comes from being physical, are sat in classrooms and told to sit still, read and be quiet.
I think there's a danger that white working class boys, particularly in the inner city, are missed. And what in many cases may be something to do with academic and intellectual achievement and development becomes a behavioural problem, and those youngsters might find themselves, you know, in behaviour units or being sent to PRU units or whatever, and that will be the route by which their needs get met after the event.
Their lack of attainment makes them vulnerable. Vulnerable is wrong, and so they cannot accept the help they need, as they've been culturally conditioned out of seeking help. You are not allowed to display vulnerability.
I think enough people in the profession know that it's an issue. I don't know that it's been acknowledged at government level or at ministerial level. I'm sure, again, they perfectly well know it.
This school didn't change overnight. You know, there were a number of children used to having a fight virtually every day. Same ones. You know, you'd exclude them, they'd come back, somebody would say something, and it would kick off again.
The peer group takes over from the parent at too young an age, and success in a peer group involves prestige-seeking activities, which is basically violence. To attain this prestige, you must become fluent in some kind of physical violent behaviour, and this prestige within your peer group will inevitably destroy your educational chances.
One of the key areas for violent behaviour is lunchtime, because tensions that might have built up the night before are starting to brew into the morning, but are being contained because the teachers are teaching good lessons. But what we can do is make it very difficult to have that type of behaviour. And who are the best people at conflict resolution? Your teachers who you've got relationships with.
To ensure a high staff visibility at break times, Paul pays teachers £10 each for doing a lunch duty.
And we'll empower the staff to stop any conflicts, support them to the hilt that if they get any bad behaviour, that it will be dealt with severely so that they can be visible and that they will stop problems at the source. And what happened, and what has happened over a period of time, is that children, here we go again, on what I've said before, are really comfortable with this. They like it.
Fellas, how are we doing? You all right? Good.
This is a reassuring blanket around us here. I don't have to get involved in certain types of behaviours. If I do get involved in certain types of behaviours, I'm going to get picked up immediately because there's a member of staff standing 5 yards away from me there. There's one over there. There's one over there.
You can, but you can go over into that space over there.
Can you paint the little space?
All right. And actually, it gives you a little bit more of a circle then, doesn't it?
We can tackle each other.
Yeah. It can be very enjoyable because it gives you an opportunity to speak to the children in a context outside the classroom. So you're not just talking to them about their business studies, you're talking to them about the football match that was on last night, about how England are doing in the Ashes or what's going to be happening at the weekend. You're having conversations with them, which I think you mentioned earlier, which show you care about them as people. That's not my fault, is it? No, not really. Well, you know that. You know that.
How many staff do you have outside at lunchtime?
20 on each side. Which
so 40 altogether? 40
altogether. It's a huge outlay.
I don't think teachers would just do it for the £10 if the school wasn't a safe working environment, but it is also an opportunity to really build those relationships.
There's another way of looking at white working class underachievement, which is to say that white working class educational failure is in fact the class system working very well indeed. Resistance between classes reinforces it. There is in Bermondsey relative to a politically active past, a marked decline in involvement in a political process. Just over 50% of the local population vote. On to anecdotal stuff. I'm going to read you out the sum total of political knowledge of the 2,000 or so children I've ever taught. Here it is. Tony Blair is Prime Minister, and there is that Cameron bloke.
What I like about this is I can go back and I can start adjusting a few of the things in my class that I know I've been doing wrong. And hopefully I can see in a few weeks' time that at least I won't get that expression on the faces of some of the kids.
When you feel that you're kind of working almost in isolation kind of thing, or that you have these kind of beliefs, and it's good for someone to validate them, and validate that things that you thought were the case and things that you thought were issues that needed raising, that other people are thinking about them, and it's entering the agenda, which I think is probably the most welcoming part of what Phil said.
Passport.
Yeah. It's you know, and also saying that actually you're right in some of what you're thinking. You know.
I think it's also really important that class is something that has been neglected for way too long. Margaret Thatcher taught us that there was no such thing as that, and that's been perpetuated with the recent Labour government, and it's never been the truth. There's always been, you know, underachievement of white working class children, and it's just a refreshing change to see it being addressed.
I perceive that white working class kids nowadays have a lack of understanding of their position in society. And to know where you want to get to and what you've got to do to get there, you've got to know where you are first.
To try and make learning irresistible to white working class children, we have to understand where they're coming from and what their values are, and we have to show them that we understand where they're coming from and we respect that, and there is a place for it in school and in education.
Every single child I've taught in my very limited understanding of these has sat transfixed in fascination. If you just lay out the 3 social orders, they don't know it, and they find it absolutely amazing, and then you tell them where they are, you can see their eyes widen and think, I better do something.
I think the big elephant in the room for the last 10 years, which we haven't talked about, actually longer in terms of the whole history of New Labour, which is, in essence, a retreat from class politics. And I quite understand why, because we kept failing and losing elections when we were too closely associated with a very specific part of the electorate. But we've gone the other way, and we've now camped out in Middle England to the degree by which that's premised on a retreat from class and actually certain intellectual traditions which assume the working class has withered away and we literally have disinvented it. Where in actual fact, if you look empirically about where the jobs are being generated, and if you look at the real forces that lie behind structural immobility and inequality, they're driven by issues of class, as they always have been.
It shouldn't be a qualification that somebody is a working class head teacher, but I said it does help. It does help to have that emotional connection, that class connection with people, because they sense it. They can feel it from you if you connect with their experiences.
How's your shirt?
It's tucked in.
Has it come out again for a change?
Yes.
Yeah? Safe journey. Give my regards to Mum.
Hi, sir.
There's nobody rushing out, running wildly. They're coming out in a calm, measured way and looking happy. Well, thank you for your advice on how to run the school. I appreciate it. You're welcome, sir. Thank you. Good man. Thank you very much. Safe journey, gents. Thank you. My pleasure.
Any back chat? You always get the last word.
I'm about 50 steps ahead of them, and I've had to be over the years. And they like that. I think they like it because they like a bit of fun themselves. The victory came, did it? We snatched on Saturday. Yeah, told you, didn't I? West Ham fan. You've got to have a lot of sympathy with West Ham at the moment. What I'm looking to do all the time is to make them feel as though they're welcome here and valued.